March 15th, 1820, a cold winter morning in New England. But this was no ordinary day. After decades of political struggles, economic tensions, and calls for independence, Maine was about to become the 23rd state of the United States. But this victory didn't come easy. Maine's road to statehood was long and complicated. It wasn't just a local dispute, it was tied to a national crisis over slavery and power in Congress. A crisis that would shape America's future and push the nation one step closer to civil war. How did a remote territory, once treated as an afterthought by Massachusetts, break free and carve its own destiny? And how did its statehood become part of one of the most controversial compromises in U.S. history? Today, we uncover the battle for Maine's independence and how Maine became the 23rd state. Before statehood, Maine wasn't its own entity. It was part of Massachusetts. This union, however, wasn't ideal. Maine was geographically distant, economically different, and often overlooked by Massachusetts lawmakers. While Massachusetts focused on industry and trade, Maine's economy was built on shipbuilding, fishing, and logging. Maine's rugged coastline made it a prime location for shipbuilding, and its vast forests provided a steady supply of timber. However, Massachusetts's political and economic priorities often left Maine's interests neglected. The state's government was centered in Boston, meaning Mainers had little say in policies that affected their daily lives. Worse yet, they faced high taxes and little representation. Many began to feel that Massachusetts treated Maine as a colony rather than an equal part of the state. By the early 1800s, resentment toward Massachusetts had reached a boiling point. The War of 1812 only made things worse. British forces raided and occupied parts of Maine, and many residents felt that Massachusetts had failed to protect them. Calls for separation grew louder, fueled by a sense of abandonment. The push for statehood gained momentum, and in 1819, Maine held a referendum. The result? An overwhelming majority. Nearly 3/4 of voters favored breaking away from Massachusetts. The Massachusetts legislature reluctantly agreed to let Maine go, but there was still one major hurdle: Congress. And the timing couldn't have been worse. While Maine was fighting for independence, another battle was brewing in Washington, D.C. Missouri wanted to enter the Union as a slave state, but that presented a major problem. At the time, the U.S. had an equal number of free and slave states, 11 each. Admitting Missouri as a slave state would tip the balance of power in Congress in favor of the South, something Northern politicians strongly opposed. A fierce debate erupted. Southern leaders insisted on Missouri's right to allow slavery, while Northerners pushed back, fearing that expanding slavery would give the South too much influence. The solution? A carefully crafted compromise. Maine would be admitted as a free state, while Missouri would enter as a slave state. This kept the balance in Congress, easing tensions for the moment. But this so-called Missouri Compromise only delayed the inevitable clash over slavery that would later lead to the Civil War. On March 15th, 1820, Congress officially admitted Maine into the Union as a free state. For Mainers, this was a victory decades in the making. It meant local governance, fairer representation, and the ability to control their own economic future. But on a national scale, Maine's statehood was about more than just independence. It was a strategic move to maintain balance in a deeply divided country. The Missouri Compromise had prevented a national crisis for the time being, but tensions over slavery would continue to escalate. Maine's path to statehood wasn't just a local struggle. It was part of a much larger battle over power in the United States. It showed how deeply divided the nation already was 4 decades before the Civil War. But what if Maine had never separated from Massachusetts? Would the balance of power have shifted sooner? Would the war have come earlier?